when this was first implemented this summer, it was implemented very quickly, right? It was implemented very quickly because it had to do with changes in the grant of AmeriCorps in particular, and we had to come up with a system that worked, and this was our start. But we're trying to recognize that this is a planning year and a year of implementation, and so we're now starting to, at this point, introduce some of the more finer elements of RTI so that we can start building toward doing it the way that it should be done. And also this, in general, will kind of impact how you start doing RTI with your individual students and small groups. So first, I wanted to start by showing you the definition of RTI from the National Education Association. And it says, the RTI process is the practice of providing high-quality instruction and intervention matched to student skill needs, monitoring student progress frequently to make changes in instructional goals, and applying child response data to important educational decisions. So there are 3 parts to a true RTI system. Number 1 is that it's an instruction and intervention based on students' needs. Number 2, it's monitoring that skill set through frequent assessment. And then finally, taking that information and applying it to general school policy or instruction. So we're going to go over a little bit of what that means. But RTI is definitely not disability identification, and it is not special education, right? We don't have the capacity here at Red Club to do that, and that's not what RTI is meant to be. RTI comes from a history of in fact, special education being kind of used in an inappropriate way.
RTI came out of a phenomenon that got noticed in the 90s across the nation of middle school kids suddenly qualifying for special ed. And what they realized is we have all these kids who are struggling in the lower grades and nobody's doing anything until they're in middle school, and now it's too late. That's where RTI got started, but the intent of RTI was not to put kids in special ed. In fact, it's to keep them out of special ed.
Exactly. So that's definitely what it isn't. So we want to just stress that. First and foremost, all students are a part of RTI, right? That's what the tier 1, 2, and 3 system is supposed to be. So at tier 1, you have a majority of your students, right? The curriculum that they're going to be exposed to is the core curriculum, right? And their group size, the instructional size that they're receiving is the standard classroom size. How frequently are they being assessed, what we call progress monitoring? That's the universal benchmark assessments. And all of you, especially those of you who are in English and math, but also in the other core subjects, those are your timed writing responses. Those are your first STAR assessments.
Your STAR assessments, your math assessments, your writing, your research.
And then, of course, now the Smarter Balanced tests as well, including the summative one at the end. Right? So there's some benchmarks along the way. That's just the universal benchmarks. And the time that we commit to that is just the classroom schedule, right? The course schedule. Once you get to tier 2, these are students who are identified as just below proficient. They're near proficient, right? So they're closer, but not quite there. They also receive core instruction, as everyone does, but they also get supplemental outside of the core instruction. And that is typically in the form of small groups. It doesn't always have to be, it could be individual. But small group is kind of considered enough. How frequently they're monitored really is dependent on each site. I didn't put anything there because every site is doing it differently. OLL is doing it a little differently than elementary school, than high school. But the idea is, and we're going to start doing this, is that they're tested slightly more frequently than these universal benchmarks, right? You want to check if they've made some progress, right? So whether that's using STAR again, or if it's using an IAB, right? You're using a smaller assessment, or if it's just a test of your own design, you're using a smaller test to see if they've had some growth, somewhat more frequently than these universal ones. And then minimum of once per week, or as prescribed by the intervention, right? Whatever.
Just a point. We may not get to that level of assessment this year.
Yeah.
At this point, I think what we're doing is using STAR again. We have a whole committee in place planning how to do some of these fine tunings. So, are you guys giving STAR in the after school time or not? Or are you just doing it in your classrooms? So you gave STAR. Everybody gives STAR at least 3 times a year, right? Right. And that happens in the regular classroom. But for your RTI tier 2 and 3 kids, have you given another STAR?
And that's okay because we haven't
that's
instructed
okay.
you to
I'm
do
just
that.
saying. Right. No. I'm just saying that's part of the things that we're figuring out at this time. Yeah.
So so again, the time that you're committing to those tier 2 students just depends on the intervention that you're doing, right? Once you've determined, what that is. And there's going to be more information given about how that happens.
Right. And John, for you guys, like you're using MobiMax, and you'll probably do a STAR assessment at some point. So you should have, because you kind of need a beginning point and to show growth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem with the high schools. You really don't have anything except for STAR that shows the beginning and growth points.
And then tier 3 are those students who are considered below or far below proficiency in a specific skill or multiple skills, right? They're not only receiving core instruction in the normal classroom, they're receiving supplemental and also perhaps intensive instruction. And especially those intensive instructions should be individual when they can be, right? They should be getting some kind of individual attention as well as small group as needed. Again, they will be have a frequency of testing higher than just the universal benchmarks, right? And again, dependent on how often you meet with them, with that student, depends on what you're doing with them. So that gives you an idea of just what the 3 tiers are, how all students are a part of it.
And in the elementary, the tier 3 kids would be kids who are in title and in the after school club. At the high school, we're still figuring out how to break that down. We're just still figuring that out.
So RTI teams are going to be developed. Every school is looking to do that, and the principals are aware of this. We've decided that what works best for us in general is grade band teams and then just building teams. So grade band teams, building level teams, yeah. Grade band teams are at elementary, for example, K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, right? At the high school, it'll probably be 9, 10, 11, 12, or even just the grade itself, dependent, right? And at the grade band level, these are you, the interventionists, and their teachers, some of you are playing double the role, right? And in those teams, whenever you get a chance, and again, we're developing this, so it's not like this is going to happen tomorrow.
No.
We're going to discuss intervention strategies, what kind of intervention does the student need, looking at that testing data, that progress monitoring data, like are they making any growth, and looking to set goals by planning your interventions, and then monitor them as they go.
So at the high school, it could look very much like the freshman cohort.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a group of teachers, even though they're not in the RTI, but they have that student, so they could easily be part of that team. And that's all going to be done by this RTI committee.
At the building level, principals and other people, and the principal leads that team, and they have other people that they've put in with them, and they're looking at the timeliness of the intervention. They're checking to see like if they're looking at the data too as well, and they're just kind of checking in,
making
and
sure things are working, making sure people are meeting,
helping where they can, that kind of thing. So you'll be seeing that in the next few months. Just to be clear about what an intervention is, right? An intervention is instruction, right? It has to involve some kind of instruction. Can be provided to small groups or individuals. It's an addition to the curriculum. It's not a replacement of any kind of curriculum. So it's not like that you're teaching something different, or that you're teaching something that is irrelevant, right? You're adding to what the student should be already getting in their core instruction. It should be consistent, right? There sometimes can be challenges where students are getting interventions that are, you do it once and then you think, okay, well, I gave the small instruction and that should be it, right? And then, when you check for student progress later on, maybe they still are struggling. So it has to be something that maybe you need to repeat or think creatively to do a little differently. And it has to be focused on remediating a skill deficit. And that's where it's so important to know what those are. And we'll talk about that also.
And that is a big difference in RTI versus any kind of special ed. Students might be in RTI during when you're studying slope in geometry, but not the rest of the time. Like they're just really struggling with that, and then that child may need special help then, or when you're doing research in English or whatever it is. So it should be fluid. Kids should be able to be moving from tier 2 to tier 1 to tier 2, just depending on what's going on in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, students aren't stuck in their tiers. They should be able to graduate, hopefully, when we see progress, right? What intervention is not? And this is kind of where we are right now, and that's okay, because again, we're building this slowly. It is not completing a form or giving the student a worksheet and saying, here you go, right? It's not assessing them. That's the progress monitoring piece, right? So intervention is the actual instruction, not the assessment. It's not a changing in seating or classroom environment. It's not parental contact. It's not extra homework to give more practice, because practice alone doesn't necessarily ensure that the student is going to get that new skill and do it better. It can help, but if the real challenge is not in how much they've done it, it's in their understanding, right? That more homework or extra practice isn't going to necessarily lead to understanding. And definitely instruction unrelated to students' identified skill deficit. That's where small group instruction can be challenging, because you need to make sure that the students you are doing small group instruction with have the same deficit, right? Because if you're pulling in kids who maybe have tangentially related skill deficits, but they're not quite the same thing, then the students are getting instruction that's not actually helping them grow in the area where they're most challenged. So that's part of what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, right?
Just looking at that.
So this is just an overall view of what RTI is, because we realized there was some confusion as to what RTI is. And believe me, we had to struggle with that too, in terms of how we bring it here and what can we do now versus what can we build to later. So far, are there any questions? Yes, John.
I'm confused. This makes it sound like RTI is like working throughout the classroom on a day-to-day basis, but I was under the impression that it was more just that 3 to 4 slot that you have is the RTI time slot. The RTI things that need to be addressed are going to take place in that 1 hour a day.
And that is exactly a perfect confusion. So remember that RTI, every kid is in RTI. And so during your classroom, the differentiation that you do, that's all part of tier 1 RTI. But for that kid, that differentiation just isn't enough, that kid comes to you after school and gets more help. That's a tier 2 kid. And for the kid who it really is not enough and they're really struggling, that kid needs to come more often, or we need to figure something else out for that tier 3 kid. But in your classroom, you still do differentiation, you still support your students, you still do all of that. And if that's working, then they're in the right tier. And if it's not working for that kid, then we need to look at, are you